What they don't tell people is the very minorities that they're seeking to help are the same groups that will get hurt the worst, because when crime goes up, it goes up faster in our minority communities. And so it's not really a true argument, because it's just politics. They know the people that they're claiming they're helping are the people they're hurting the worst, but they don't care because it's all political.
All right, folks, it's time for our favorite podcast. Across the country, the debate over bail reform has ignited some of the most heated conversations in criminal justice. Supporters of no cash bail argue that no one should sit in jail simply because they can't afford to pay. Critics warn that eliminating financial accountability puts communities at risks and weakens the justice system. And of course, Texas happens to be the hot spot. Front and center, I brought Ken Good, professional bondsman of Texas, also a lawyer, got a master's degree as well, has been covering this topic. How you doing today, Ken?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
All right. So, before I even get into this, what is a bail bondsman? What is your job? What do you do?
A bondsman bonds people out of jail. They do supervision. They make sure they check in. And then if they fail to show up for court, they do what they can to get them back, which sometimes is a phone call, but sometimes it's going and finding them and bringing them back to court, even against their wishes.
And I guess on that level, some of those moments have captured the public attention, and we got Dog the bounty hunter and
Well,
people like
he's not a bounty, he's not a bondsman, but he's a bounty hunter, a recovery agent. But
yeah.
yes.
So, all right. So the purpose of bail is, and I just want to talk about these basics so people can kind
Sure.
of, remind themselves if they don't know or even clarify certain things. Why is bail even used? Why is it part of our criminal justice system?
Well, bail is what assurance you're giving to the court that you're going to return to answer the charges that have been filed against you. You know, we hear all the time, well, there's a presumption of innocence. These people haven't been found guilty of anything. These are all things that have been addressed by case law for probably decades. Bail it doesn't have anything to do with the presumption of innocence. That's at trial. The bail is the assurance that you're going to give that you're going to come back and answer those charges. And all these experiments that we're trying across the country, we're replacing bail with a promise, not anything else. Their promise to come back. And we've been told for so many years, oh, people don't want to miss court. They want to come back to court. Not gangs, not career criminals, not organized crime, and that's what we found, especially in our inner cities.
All right. And so I'm sure there's a lot of stories going both ways of people getting released and committing atrocious crimes, maybe even murdering people. And then there have been people that are just sitting there rotting in jail and mentally ill, not even know what's going on, and then they end up with the short ends of the stick. So from what I understand, Texas, there was a federal case against the bail system in Texas, and there was a consent decree, I guess a settlement, which restructured how the bail proceedings would go. So tell us about that. How did that lawsuit, what was that lawsuit about? Was it a specific person that, felt that they got the wrong end of the stick, or was this a claim of systemic problems?
This
What
was a
was,
case called O'Donnell versus Harris County, and it was a situation where a county commissioner in Harris County approached some activist litigation firms and invited them to come to Harris County to sue the county. So at the time that lawsuit was filed, it was probably cited across the country as the most important case on bail reform. And you mentioned that they entered into a settlement agreement. What you didn't mention is that had been reversed two or three times already at the Fifth Circuit before they entered into a settlement, doing all the things the Fifth Circuit said they couldn't do. And so they had a settlement agreement. They dressed it up and called it a consent decree. But all it was the activists and the county that agreed on what they wanted bail reform, and they put it into a consent decree. The problem with what's happened since then, the Fifth Circuit in the Daves versus Dallas County case ruled that reversed whatever was left of the O'Donnell case, and even said that it should not have ever been filed. And so they reversed the rulings. The problem is the consent decree has still been followed, even though the Texas legislature has amended the statutes. And so Harris County is no longer in compliance with the law as a result of SB 6 4 years ago and now SB 9. And the county has no intention to do anything to change that because it was a brother-in-law deal to begin with. So now we have the attorney general who's entered an appearance in the case, even though it's been closed, arguing that he should be allowed to appear to address the consent decree because SB 9 just went into effect September 1 and the consent decree is not in compliance. They're briefing that issue. The attorney general's reply is due today. And so I will wait and see. But since the trial court judge has been reversed 7, 8, or 9 times, I would expect her to deny the intervention and then have it go up to the Fifth Circuit, be reversed, and then come back and address the merits because he's already filed a motion to vacate and dismiss the consent decree.
All right, so the focus of our topic today is going to be what we call, I guess, no cash bail. It's not
Mhm.
just something in Texas. I believe it's been implemented in New York. So we have somewhat of a track record. I know that there was a Ukrainian refugee murdered in Charlotte last month. Let's talk about that story. Irina
Leon?
Zarutsky.
Hmm.
So what happened there? And
Well,
is
I
this,
think I think the reason why that's caught the national attention, first, there's a video of her horrendous death, but the problem is the guy that was her killer has a long criminal history. And, I think probably his problem highlights the issue of mental health in the criminal justice system. If you look through the history of the United States, we've kind of reduced our mental health facilities and we've reduced them to the point where our prisons and our county jails were the largest mental health facilities in the country. But with this bail reform that we've been going through for the last 5 or 6 years or so, these reforms have created a King's X. If you claim mental health, then that gets the criminal case dismissed. And he had a long criminal history. He'd served some time, but most of the time his criminal cases had been dismissed because of his mental health issues.
yeah.
And so the problem we've got in our criminal justice system is uh, these people are no longer getting help. They're not getting help in the criminal justice system. They're not getting help outside the criminal justice system. And I think her tragedy has put a spotlight on that.
So in my earlier career, I worked at the public defender's office and I
Mhm,
was involved in criminal law. And I remember in federal court, they had statutory sentence guidelines,
mhm.
which from what I understood were sort of implemented because some judges were apparently uh, too empathetic or too sympathetic with the criminals and would not impose penalties that were in light of what they were doing. And so now, then they got stuck with this, okay, they can't work around the sentencing guidelines. And so there was, I guess the fallback with that was that some people were sentenced harshly or more harshly than possible. And it sounds almost like this new, no cash bail might be suffering from the same thing. It's a one size fits all, and it's not,
I think
producing good
I
results.
think that's a good way to describe it. I mean, let's go across the country. So in New York, what they did was in the original reforms, they passed a whole laundry list of misdemeanor crimes and moderate crimes that no longer the judge had any discretion. So he could only release them on no bail.
Yeah.
And so it was mandated, required. They had no discretion. So no matter how many times they were arrested for that charge, same result. And so if first time offender, gang member, organized crime, career criminal, all treated the same. And so the problem is, these organized groups figure out ways to make a lot of money doing that. And they start manipulating the system. And so in New York, you start seeing rollbacks of that list and giving judges more discretion. In California, we call it release on zero bail. We tried it during COVID a lot. They had a statewide referendum that failed. They tried to enact a statute or some statutes to kind of codify that. They did a rollback petition, which passed, so it didn't happen. And so we've got counties that are kind of doing that same thing. They released not without any accountability. And the problem that you have on these simple release mechanisms, whether it's zero bail, released on no bail, or in Texas we call it released on personal bond, your failure to appears are so much higher. It creates backlogs, and then as the backlogs grow, that creates pressure for judges to dismiss cases. And when you start dismissing cases, criminals see that as a green light to commit more crime, and that's what we've seen in our urban areas.
And it seems like there's some other unintended consequences. I read through some of your literature on what you're recommending, and one of them is, all right, so somebody, didn't show up for court, then they're driving, they get pulled over by the police, and then it's,
Mhm.
either they are like they realize they're going to get, in trouble, and so then that generates they start fleeing and cause chaos down the road somehow or another.
Well,
So,
we've had examples of that very thing happening, but when they checked for his warrants, that he shot and killed the officer, and so
yeah.
some of our bail reform is named after that of that officer, um, and it's not. I mean, so our bail reform has been to strengthen accountability, and not to go down this road of a bad bail reform. And kind of Harris County is its own little oasis right now, especially on misdemeanors, as we try to figure out how to straighten that out.
Yeah. All right. So just to lay the cards out on the table, because it's not like I've got somebody that's going to be here right now advocating for no cash bail and telling me all the reasons why we should keep it or maybe just improve it. But basically, their position is there's poor people getting arrested. They can't post the bond, and that's not fair. And then you got some rich kid who committed some heinous act and he can post bond and he gets out. Does that kind of summarize their position?
I think that's part of their argument, which I think, especially for low level crimes, I mean, it is based on the assumption that we still in the United States have low misdemeanor offenders who are stuck in jail. And I think the lesson from the last 4 or 5 years is that is not true. And what they completely ignore when they make this argument, they completely ignore organized crime, career criminals, gang members, and they have no plan. In fact, when I debate with people from the other side, their argument is if we can just provide housing and food, then we won't have crime. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's the same argument for immigration. If we just provide them with housing and medicine, they wouldn't be violating the immigration laws. I mean, it's ludicrous arguments, but there's a lot of overlap between the two.
All right. So, from the advocates of no cash bail
Hmm.
position, when you say to them, listen, they're not showing up to court. We can see that. Them promising they're going to show up to court, whether it's, hey, I'm not going to court. I got a court date, but I don't care. Or I didn't even know I had a court date. I'm not even paying attention. I got so many problems. I can't, make heads or tails. What do you say to that position?
What they normally say is that's an acceptable cost to the system, and I'm like any failure to appear does absolute damage to the criminal justice system. So what I would say to that is, um, that's a recipe for your bail reform is really we're going to have more crime and you put up with more crime. And what they don't tell people is the very minorities that they're seeking to help are the same groups that will get hurt the worst, because when crime goes up, it goes up faster in our minority communities. And so it's not really a true argument because it's just politics. They know the people that they're claiming they're helping are the people they're hurting the worst, but they don't care because it's all political.
All right. So, how long have you been a bail bondsman, and how long have you been sort of focused on this particular issue, the no ga cash bail?
Well, I'm not a bail bondsman, but I'm a bail bondsman's attorney. I've
Okay.
been practicing law for, I hate to even say, since 1989, so
Yeah.
almost 30 something years. I mean,
Wow.
I've been married 30 years this year, and that I was married in 96, so
Yeah.
7 more years than that. So that tells you
Yeah.
that, I mean,
Yeah.
30 something, 30 over 35 years. I've been looking at the issue of criminal justice reform, writing articles on it probably for the last 15 years, maybe less.
All right. So, are you leading the charge in Texas, or are you even on the forefront nationally on this issue?
I'm on the board of PBT, which is the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. I'm on their legislative committee. I testify at the legislature on bills. I would like to just I'm on the forefront. We like to say we're a resource. We have our own podcast, so we like to say we've created a library of different topics. So if you want to educate yourself as a legislator or the public, we have a lot of topics we can educate you on what works and what doesn't work. So am I on the forefront? I mean, some people would say I probably stick my nose in more stuff than I should. I would just say we like to be a resource, and so we take every opportunity to do that.
All right, so let's get into your proposal, your proposed reforms. And it's not just hey, scrap the no cash bail and go back to the system the way it was before. Let's go through A to Z.
Okay.
Tell me what your number one reform. Let's go through the reforms. Give us
Well, I think first of all, we need to limit the use of these simple release mechanisms. I'm not saying we should exclude them because they are there to protect the very reason why the reformers argue we should only use them. It's a stopgap to make sure that nobody gets caught in jail. I think so. I think the number, but you have to acknowledge that the failure to appear rate is so much higher on these simple release mechanisms that they will have negative impacts on their case just because of the release system you're using. So you could put the defendant in a much worse position just by the release mechanism you use. Second, I think we have to have a lot more accountability. So if you fail to show up for court, then like in Houston, we have examples of people failing to show up for court for 17 times and they keep getting released on the same, uh, pinky promise that they'll come back. I
yeah.
mean, at some point, if they don't come back, then they're not going to come back. And so you have to hold them. And so what is that? One time, two times, three times, four times, five times. I mean, there's a point when you're like, this is not working. And I like probably the system I would like is if you're giving them a personal bond or a simple release the first time, if they fail to appear, they don't get that again.
Yeah.
And then if they miss again, they might get held or they get held for a time and then you try it again. So like a shock release in pretrial instead of post conviction. And then if they fail to appear, accountability for that. Also, you need to resolve the case. I mean, you can't get a person's case resolved if they don't come to court. And so by getting them to court, you can get their cases resolved more quickly. And once you do that, you can give justice to victims. It also sends a message to, we like to say that there's a small group of people that commit most of the crimes in a given area. Well, what we don't realize is there's a gray area between the law and order citizens and the people committing most of the crime. And they're looking to see which group they're going to be every day. And consequences cause them to live in the law and order part of the city. No consequences cause them to join the crime area. I did a podcast with a sheriff who was forced to live under one of these preliminary injunctions until it was reversed on appeal, and crime started going up. And for the 4 years they were under it, but after it was reversed, they returned to a system of accountability. And within 6 months, crime started going down. So if we would implement accountability, get cases resolved more quickly, that will send the message, and criminals will change conduct to comply.
So part of this equation appears to be I mean, it almost sounds like too logical, but to assess the person that's being charged with the crime to see if they're a flight risk and all that.
hmm
Um,
hmm
h- how would that assessment take place? Would the judge, would there be some kind of pretrial system?
Well, I think we need to give more discretion to judges, not limit their discretion. I mean, we fail to remember, or no. I think it's intentional. When we're tying the hands of judges, it's because they want a specific result. If we give more discretion to judges, they're going to exercise that discretion and they're going to hold more people. The reality is people are being arrested for committing crimes. We don't just arrest a whole bunch of people wrongfully. And so they're assessing people who've been accused of crimes. And if you have a criminal history, and this is the problem, if you have a substantial criminal history, then you should be treated differently than a first time offender. The problem is we've done the reform, and if we just did that, our jails, that's not the result that our opposition wants. They have to push reforms that tie the hands of judges to address criminals with substantial criminal histories because to get the results they want. And that's what's one of the things that's pushing crime up.
Now, have you heard from any of the judges on the front line
Sure.
that are opposing your reform efforts, or what you plan, what you think should be done?
Well, I've done podcasts across the country and I've talked to judges on my own podcast. In fact, we're going to have our annual meeting in a couple of months and we're going to have a panel of judges. And all we're going to talk about is different scenarios of what they look at in setting bail. So, have I talked to judges? I mean, I've done podcasts with people from the other side who
Yeah.
disagree with me. And sometimes they're very respectful conversations. But the problem is, if they cannot respond to my arguments, then they resort to name calling,
Yeah.
which is kind of common. So if all they're doing is just doing their talking points and they can't respond on the merits, then I'm going to end up being called names for the last 10 minutes of the podcast.
All right. So what is the name of the podcast and where do we find it?
Well, the podcast that we do is called The Bell Post. You can find more information about us on our website, pbtx.com, but we also have on our menu a link to our podcast, or you can just go to thebellpost.com.
Okay, one of the other recommendations you have is to develop systems, standing orders to monitor who is in jail pre-conviction and order re-magistration if they are still in jail after 72 hours.
Yes.
What's that trying to accomplish?
Well, we've had situations probably 10 years ago where people, got arrested and sent to jail. They went to see the judge. They had bail set, and then nobody checked to see if they were still in jail a month later. And so we've gotten a lot better in Texas, especially on following up with who is still in jail. But I like to have that stopgap of 72 within 72 hours, see who is still in jail. And then if they're still in jail after you've set bail for them, to bring them back to court and say, why are you still here? And maybe we need to reassess their bond. Maybe we need to lower it. But when we have systems like that, we already have safeguards, and most states already do, where you can't be held in jail past a certain period of time for a misdemeanor or a felony. And without these systems, they get lost and you don't realize that they're still in jail. So I think anything that helps, and I think our courts are doing a much better job about that today than they were 6 or 7 years ago.
All right, for those fortunate enough not to have experienced the criminal justice system, just basically walk us through. So you get arrested, you get thrown in jail. I mean, I hate to use the word thrown, but you get put in jail, and then at some point you go in front of a judge, and this whole bail issue becomes, well, one of the main questions at the beginning is how does that happen? I mean, we're talking about a
Well, okay,
week.
so you really don't realize it, but I think a lot of arrests across the country come from a probable cause affidavit. So they go before a judge, they present a probable cause affidavit, the judge issues a warrant. And so a lot of people in Texas and a lot of people across the country are arrested and then they're taken to jail, the closest jail, and then they see a magistrate and they have bail set and they're released from jail once the bail's posted and they don't have a charge filed. And then at some point in the future, maybe 6 months, maybe a year later, if it's a felony, it gets presented to the grand jury and then the grand jury issues an indictment. And so they can either leave the bail at the same amount, they can raise it. And so then you have an indictment, or for a misdemeanor, you have an information filed, and that's when the case begins. So you can be on bail for a period of time before you've ever had charges filed. Uh, and the other situation is you have a crime, they indict you, they issue a warrant for your arrest, you're taken before a judge, they tell you what the charge is, and they set bail. So you go before a judge. We call it initial appearance in Texas. And one of the things they do as a part of that is they set bail. In Harris County, if you're on a laundry list of misdemeanor charges, they're going to give you a personal bond. You may not even see the judge. And that's all a part of this consent decree that has such bad ramifications. And, let me make a point about that. So in Harris County, like 5 years ago, a misdemeanors probably had a 65% conviction rate. And now here we are in 2025. It probably has a 95% dismissal rate
Really? Wow.
on misdemeanors. So why are we even prosecuting misdemeanors? And people say, well, it's just a misdemeanor. That's okay. If that's your position, it's just a misdemeanor. Then why are we even have misdemeanor courts? The reality is that today's misdemeanors are now the training grounds for tomorrow's felonies because it's a green light to commit more crime because we don't have any accountability or we're not prosecuting people for that in our some of our urban areas.
One of the interesting features of a society such as ours that have laws on the books is that laws don't necessarily sunset or end. Before you know it, it's 200 years later, and some of these laws that were put on the books 200 years ago might not even make sense. I mean, you might not even have so one of your recommendations is
Yeah.
to review existing laws to determine what should not be on the book. I
Well,
mean,
I agree with that. I mean, we should always review our laws to see what should continue to be a crime and what should not. Because, like you said, we're always, when something emotional happens, we're very quick to add that as a violation of the law, but we don't sunset those. When cultures change, and we end up giving that as a discretion to the district attorneys from county to county. And we end up having problems. Like, in Harris County, they're not going to prosecute for certain crimes like maybe missed marijuana or even Cadillac converter theft. But then in Montgomery County, right next door, they're going to. And, the public doesn't understand that.
yeah,
And so it undermines the credibility of the criminal justice system when something's a crime in one county, but the next county it's not.
yeah. And it almost sounds like to some degree AI could help review.
Uh,
I mean, because you talk,
no.
some states have tons of laws on the books, and to
Yeah,
go
but
through,
the problem with AI is the same thing as with this argument that we should have risk assessments pre-trial. And even though all the largest digital companies in the world have come out with a joint release saying we shouldn't use uh, AI risk assessments in the criminal justice system, I don't think we should be using AI in the criminal justice system for determining what crimes to prosecute people on. I don't think we're there yet.
yeah,
I think, and here's the problem with AI in that situation. Our criminal justice system is not intended to treat everybody the same. Our criminal justice system is intended to give as much pressure to you to cause you to change course so that you will become a productive citizen. What pressure is needed for you would be different than what pressure is needed for me. It's different than what pressure is needed for somebody who's got 10 priors, or it's different somebody that's got three previous felony convictions and spent time in the pen. I'm a very, I mean, I can be beat up very easily. I mean, you just tell my wife and I'm in trouble and I'm going to change course. But
I'm making
so
a note of that right
but
now.
the pressure that, that needs to be individual and it needs to stay individual. And the problem that we see in this criminal justice reform is we see all this push to we need to have the same cookie cutter results. Well, the cookie cutter results is one of the reasons why we're in this problem, because the pressure that the cookie cutter is going to impose is the bare minimum, even for the people who've committed the same crime multiple times, and
Yeah.
that's the problem.
All right. So my favorite topic, and I'm not my favorite topic, but one thing that you mentioned that's an issue here is mental health
Yeah.
patients that, commit crimes, they're homeless, they don't even know what they're doing half of the time, they end up in jail and they're not really a criminal and all that. So where does that factor into the reforms that you're proposing?
Look, if we could solve the mental health problem between the two of us, we would be billionaires. The problem is, if you look at the history of the mental institutions that have been closed down in the country, you completely understand why they were closed down. I mean, anytime a county didn't have the money that they had a shortfall, they would cut money to the mental health facilities. And so you have examples in our history where mental health patients, died of starvation because they just didn't have the proper funding. And I think there was a push for class action lawsuits regarding mental health facilities in our history, which is one of the pushes that put them out of business. As a result, we've kind of delegated that to the criminal justice system. In fact, if you're charged with a certain crime and you're held incompetent, one of the things we do is try to make you competent so you can stand trial. And so we have a long period, or we have a period of time where we then moved all those people to the criminal justice system and they're being treated there. Now, because of this criminal justice reform, we're trying to exclude them, but right now it's being a King's X. It dismisses the criminal case with no consequences, and so they get just released back on the street. And I know this is a very expensive issue, and it's one that there's not an easy answer. The reality is the cheapest option of all the really bad options is to continue to treat these people probably in the criminal justice system because they already have the facilities. I don't see that happening, but I also see we're at the end of allowing mental health to be a King's X for a criminal charge as well. I mean, to think about it also, criminals find out that if they just claim they have a mental issue, you're going to dismiss their criminal case. And so
Yeah.
suddenly a lot of organized crime, career criminals, and gang members have mental issues.
I mean, my question is, who doesn't have a mental issue? I mean, depression. Oh, I'm on the spectrum. I don't even know.
Yeah.
Am I on the spectrum? Just, because I say crazy things every once in a while. So I think that is part of the problem with solving the mental health issue, whether it's gun related, crime related. To me, it sounds, and I'm not holding myself out as an expert in any of these fields, but to me, it almost sounds like if you don't have the money to set up these institutions or they can't even exist for whatever reason, um, I think providing mental health services in the jails and the prisons is better than just releasing everybody,
Yes. Look, I did a debate recently with somebody from, the advocacy groups, and they were arguing that nobody, even someone accused of murder, should be held in jail pretrial. Now, maybe someone accused of murder should be held in a hospital, but they shouldn't be held in jail. And I'm sorry, if that's the argument from the activists, then there's not a compromise because that's a ludicrous argument.
All right. So one of the other things you recommend, and I fully support this, is adding more trial courts. I think more judges, more people in the system. I know that costs money. Mental health treatment also costs money, but talk to me about, adding more courts. How is that going to help? Some people are like, I don't want to have any more courts. I don't want to have any more lawyers.
Yeah, I think yes. I think one of the problems that we have with that is, we have all these arguments that the courts that we currently have are not really doing enough. They'll be done at noon and then gone the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And so I've seen that argument made at the legislature. So in Texas, one of the things that they're doing is or they've done is they've added the ability to remove judges if they don't, resolve the number of cases they're expected to be there. I don't know if it's that strong, but they've added the ability to review a judge by the Judicial Commission based upon them not doing their work. So I think they're trying to add accountability to the judges. Also, they're putting pressure on judges to be the decision makers on bail so that we'll know who to be held accountable. So what we have is this whole group of magistrates in Texas that are Chapter 54 magistrates. So they're kind of who are they accountable to and all this. So one of the changes that we just made that went into effect September 1 or passed this legislative session is we've limited Chapter 54 magistrates. There's certain crimes they can no longer magistrate, which is their number one job, is to magistrate and do the initial appearance. So, but murder, capital murder, and some other violent offenses, we want the district judge to magistrate these people, and so it's so we can hold them accountable. And so then we've got all these reporting requirements added, so that if we agree that they're doing things that they're doing, and we have a substantial backlog, then we can start addressing what we need to do, what additional course we need, so that we can address those backlogs,
All right.
whether it's a temporary basis or a permanent.
Are there any other recommendations that we haven't talked about?
Well, we always are looking for ways to improve the criminal justice system. I think what people don't realize is what's good for the criminal justice system is usually good for the bail industry. I mean, in Texas, the private surety bail system releases approximately 83% of people arrested, according to the latest statistics from the Office of Court Administration. I think it's between 83 and 86%. So, I mean, we are a substantial partner of the criminal justice system in Texas, and and anything that gets people to court, anything that helps the criminal justice system get cases resolved, is something that is good for for the bail industry as well.
Has there, in your discussions on other podcasts and debating activists and all that, has there been anything that they've said or produced that has changed your mind in any regard?
I did a podcast with someone who was very familiar with the DC system, and we get the DC system gets thrown out as an alternative to the private industry bail system, and we keep saying it's too expensive. And I think I talked about what works and what doesn't work with him, and he even said that would the DC system would never pass today if it was coming up for a vote because it's so expensive. New Jersey system's the same thing, where they tried to replace the private industry bail system, and they did it with a system that was so costly they had to do a statewide tax increase to fund it, and it still ran out of money. So, is there anything that somebody's changed my mind? You know what? I've always thought that we can find compromise or common ground. But after debating some of the activists where they will not agree that what's failing is failing, where they will not agree that the very community they seek to help is the minority communities are the ones that are getting hurt the worst, I think I've discovered that there's no compromise with these activist groups.
Yeah, well, I think they're very, I'm not going to speak for all activists or whatever. I do some advocacy in the environmental space and the disability space, and yes, I've seen, advocates in action or whatever. And I think sometimes if you take away the issue, there's nothing for them to do. So,
Well,
if
but
they're,
that's exactly right because um, it's in some ways it's like the left has outsourced criminal justice reform to the activists because you and I would agree if it's not working we need to change to something else,
yeah,
but when you outsource it to the activists they're never going to agree it's not working. They're always going to say we just need more time. It's not working because of other factors, and if we would just leave it alone, or the worst thing is they'll say it's doing exactly what we intended.
yeah. Well, it's a complicated world out there. I don't, all these big issues, I don't know that they're ever going to get resolved. You keep working on it, you try to improve it, but I don't know that there's a perfect solution that, with limited resources that we can, effectuate.
I think that's a good point. I think we've been taken advantage of by resources because they're so organized. The activists are. They have all these pseudo reports, and the reports or the studies from academia is usually behind a paywall. So there can be academic studies and research that says when you decrease police crime is going to go up. But these pseudo studies that say, oh, we don't need the police, we can defund the police and we'll be safer. If you do a Google search, all you're going to find is the crap. You're never going to find the studies from academia.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that to me, after this discussion, I hone in on two things. One, yeah, well, three things. One, I want an effective criminal justice system.
Hmm.
Two, I don't think there's anybody out there that wants crime. And you're always going to have some crime or a lot of crime or whatever. I would like it to be to reduce it as much as possible. And at the same time, I would like equal protection. I don't want somebody who's poor sitting and rotting when, some rich kid or whatever who really committed a heinous act is out frolicking and, having a good old time on daddy's, charge cards or whatever, so
Yeah, but if you've got a criminal history, then you're not in jail because you're poor. You're in jail because of your criminal history.
yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you. But I still just I want equal protection, low crime, and a functional criminal justice system.
Great
So
points.
I know you're doing your best, and I think a lot of what you're doing, I agree with. And I'd like to see. Let me ask before I'm going to end this discussion right now on this last question. What states right now are considering no cash bail? Are there states that are considering it?
Well, we've got California that is doing it by county, where, they did a statewide thing, but they did a rollback petition and the rollback passed. So they're LA's kind of doing it. New York passed reform. And so really right now we're going through a phase of rollbacks. I mean, New York has rolled it back at least 3 or 4 times. That's going to be the key issue in the upcoming mayor race or the governor's race next year. I would say, is it New Hampshire that is rolling back? Had just did a big rollback of the reform because it wasn't working. New Jersey, there's pushes for it, but they're not opaque on what they've done. They've done a lot of cite and release, which is the cornerstone of their reform to decrease their jail population, and that's not worked well for the public. So I think Tennessee has a. So what we're seeing now is a pushback where the pendulum is swinging back to the right, and when it swings too far, then you've got states like Tennessee where they're proposing a constitutional amendment just to allow them to detain people until trial,
Yeah.
and so we want to fight. I mean, I don't think that's good when we swing too far to the left. The public will never stand for that because as crime increases, they're going to come unhinged. But when the pendulum swings too far to the right, the cost of detaining everybody is so high, the public's not going to support that either.
All right. So is there a website where I can find all your material and information? I know you mentioned your podcast already, but for those that want to dig a little deeper into what we're discussing today.
Sure, we have a website called pbtx.com, the professional bondsman of Texas. So pbtx.com. We have a blog where we highlight important criminal justice stories in the news. We also have our own podcast, which we've already previously mentioned.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ken. Ken Good. Um, I mean, this guy's, he was, can I call you a scholar? I mean, you're on the Texas Law Review. You've argued cases in front of the Texas Supreme Court.
Well,
So,
I've written a lot of scholarly articles. I've written a lot of articles for the Attorney at Law magazine, Law 360, other publications. So I have intentionally looked to write articles on these issues. So, I mean, you can call me an author of scholarly articles, but I'm just an attorney. I specialize in bail law. I've become very knowledgeable on the constitutional issues for criminal justice reform and the reason why is because before we got involved, uh, nobody was telling the truth. I mean, nobody was telling. Everything came from a left perspective. Everything came from an activist perspective, and that it was just all wrong. And I went to this O'Donnell case. And I went to an early hearing in that and came out saying the judge is going to go left. She's going to be wrong, and we need to warn everybody. And I think I've been proven correct. I think the judge has been reversed 7, 8, or 9 times now on that case.
I don't know if too many judges that like getting reversed. Well,
No,
but 7 times is kind of all right. Well, that'll do it for this episode of Cut to the Chase. Folks, I want you to share this episode. It's a big discussion. Ken is coming up with some good ideas. He's putting his heart and soul into this. So he wants good results for everybody. And, the discussion can take place in a civil manner. And so digging deep into the information, reading his point of view, if you're on the opposite side, don't just sit there and lock in on what you think is the right thing to do and go into the cyberspace and just hear everything that you like to hear. You need to read the opposition. And if you're on Ken's side, I mean, same thing. Take a look at what the other side is saying, come up with your own opinion, and let's help this world and our states and our country progress. Criminal justice reform is always going to be an issue, whether it's bail, whether it's sentencing, the crimes that are on the book. We gotta keep on top of this stuff, folks. Ken, thank you for joining us again, and that'll do it for this episode of Cut to the Chase.
thank you for having me.
That's all for this episode of Cut to the Chase. But before you go, will you open up your podcast app and give us a 5-star review? You can also leave a comment about what you liked most or other topics you'd like us to cover. And please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming shows. Thanks, everybody. Be safe out there.